monster shed, and he was assessed at $179,000, I think. $190,000, I think. My house is 2,200 square feet, so it's 300 feet smaller. I got a half acre, which I know is a lot of land in New York City, but in Guilderland that's somewhat normal. It's a little bigger than an average lot, but it's about normal. So we got a half acre instead of 12 acres. We don't have a pool. We don't have a shed. And I'm assessed at I was originally assessed at 268, and I fought it and got it knocked down to 240. But he's assessed at 190 when he's got 24 times as much land. He's got a pool. He's got a shed. He's got a bigger house. So that was an issue I took to the voters, and the voters agreed that that didn't seem right, and I got elected. But you're hitting on a different point, which is just the unfairness of taxation.
Right.
And I hear from a lot of people, you'll hear a lot of politicians, especially, I'm a Republican, Republicans are always saying we're going to cut taxes. You know, if you don't cut the spending, then you're lying when you say you're going to cut taxes. You're not really going to cut the taxes. You're going to find revenue enhancements to make up for whatever taxes you cut.
Exactly.
And you're going to pass the taxes down to the locality so that, all right, we're going to cut school aid from the state. Well, then the school districts are going to have to raise the school taxes, and that's property tax. The challenge is to cut spending. It's spending, spending, spending. And so people will ask me, what taxes would you cut? That's putting the cart before the horse. We got to cut the spending first.
That's right.
And if we can get down to cutting spending, then we can deal with which taxes are best. And I have answers on the taxes. I mean, my answer on the taxes is setting aside that this tax is better than that tax. The first thing we got to do is we got to reduce the number of taxes. Mm-hmm. There are so many people. You know, if you ever tried to figure out how many taxes are there, I'll bet you there's more than 1,000.
I don't think I can count them.
And what's interesting is when you get down to and you take state and local revenue and you add it all up and you say, okay, what are the biggest sources of revenue for the state and local governments? Add it together. You know, property tax, whatever. About 5 taxes account for 90+% of revenue that the state and local governments receive. You got personal income tax, you got corporate income tax, you got property tax, you got sales tax. It's only about 5, and maybe if you go up to 10 taxes, you're going to get the vast majority of tax revenue that's raised. So why do we have all the other taxes? You know, what's the reason why we have all these other taxes? And the answer for that is there's no good reason for us to have all these other taxes. It's just an excuse to get a little bit more money here, a little bit more money there. The Thruway Authority is a great example. The Thruway bond's been paid off for more than 10 years. Those tolls are supposed to be gone. We're not supposed to have to pay tolls to go on the Thruway anymore. And the answer to that is to merge the Thruway Authority with the Department of Transportation, let the DOT take over the roads, and get rid of the toll booths. And yes, you know, we're going to have a little bit less revenue because we're not going to have the Thruway tolls coming in, but they spend so much money. There's so much money wasted on the Thruway Authority. And the economies of scale of merging those two functions, you're going to save about as much as you're going to lose, but then you're not taxing the heck out of people when they're driving on the Thruway. Yeah. And there's actually safety issues. If you take somebody who's driving on a local road, and they could take the Thruway, but you know what? It's a little bit out of the way, the speed limit's not that much higher, and I got to pay tolls to go on that. There's a small number of people who are choosing to take local roads over the Thruway in certain situations. And I can tell you it's about a situation west of Schenectady where you have that issue. And the problem is that the Thruway is 10 times safer. The fatality rate is 1/10 of the fatality rate on a regular local road. So by discouraging people from using the Thruway, you are effectively encouraging them to use the road that's less safe, and you're increasing the number of deaths. So there's a lot of things you can do that are counterintuitive, but I think I went off on a tangent there. Did you have another question? I'm sorry.
So far as the transportation system, is that owned by the city or the state?
Which transportation system?
Oh, we got the MTA, we got the Long Island Railroad, there's so many of them.
Long Island Railroad is a part of the MTA.
It's part of the MTA, okay.
The MTA, Metropolitan Transportation Authority, is an authority. It's a public authority that's created by state law. It is a public entity, public sector. They get paid money. They get public sector wages, some pretty outrageous pay. Yeah. And most of that is public sector. And so, and the Thruway Authority is a different authority. I'm glad you mentioned the MTA because it's one of the things I like to talk about. Yeah. The MTA, in 2008, the 2009 numbers aren't public yet, but in 2008, 54 employees of the MTA made over $200,000 a year. And it's pretty astonishing when you see that. You've got people with, my favorite job title there is, I mean, there's a conductor who made $270,000. For walking up and down the train taking tickets, you get $270,000.
There's got to be a reason. 8 million people a day use that. Yeah. And
so,
it's $2.25 a person, one way.
But check this out, okay? My favorite job in there is there's a job title called Senior Advisor to the Chairman. Gets like $280,000 a year. Let me get this straight. You don't do anything because you're an advisor. You don't manage people.
Yeah.
You would $280,000. I want that job. $280,000 a year to be an advisor. And the thing is, when I tell people about this idea, my big idea is to cap public sector pay at $100,000 a year, which down in New York City, people aren't as appreciative of that as they are up in Albany, where not a lot of people make over $100,000 a year. But, you know, and people say, well, $100,000 a year, one of the big questions or complaints people make is, well, you won't be able to get good people, you know, if you only pay $100,000 a year. And the problem with that is the MTA has a lot of people making over $200,000 a year. So they're apparently getting some really good people, right? Then why are they losing $500 million a year? Because I'll tell you what, you pay me $100K to run the MTA, I can lose $500 million a year on $100K. You can find plenty of people who would lose money making $100K.
That's not even talking about the pensions that a lot of these people get. I mean,
pensions are a big issue too.
In the private sector, they don't get pensions like the city and the government give.
Right.
You know, right. So I don't see how they're getting away with doing things like this. That's totally outrageous.
They're getting away with it because we allow it. We as voters need to stand up and say no, and we need to question. The first reaction that I think a lot of people have when they talk to a politician is they look for the government to fund something that they want funded. And we as voters have to turn around, we have to turn to politicians and say, wait a minute, we gotta stop spending money. Where are you gonna cut spending? Challenge them. I want you to cut spending, I want you to tell me where you're gonna cut. Politicians won't answer that question, but you gotta keep asking them. Okay. Did you have any questions?
So now, what is the total debt of the state right now?
I hear different numbers than that, and I don't feel comfortable giving you a hard number on what the state's total debt is. I know what the deficit is. The deficit, the difference between the amount we're spending and the amount of revenue we expect to come in for the coming fiscal year.
Okay, the deficit, that would be good.
They're talking about $9 billion. Of course, a couple months ago they were talking about $7 billion, and it grew. And a bigger concern is you go another year down the road, and they're talking about the deficit growing to $20 billion. And we got to get a hold on that. And the only way to get a hold on that, the idea that we're going to raise taxes to come up with the money, you're just scaring more and more businesses out of New York State. You're stopping more and more people from starting. I started a business, and the process of starting a business is already hard enough. And you have a good year, you make some money. You have a bad year, you don't make much money. To have all that money go away, to have all that money taken out of your hands, and then I see it from people who used to hire me, and people hire me for what we do. And now, hire our firm to handle the things that we do, and all of a sudden, people don't have as much money as they used to have. The way to generate business in New York State isn't to have 3 guys in the legislature pick who's going to get money from the state to start a business. The way to get there is find a way to get taxes lower. If you get taxes lower, then more people want to do business in New York State. You've got to find ways to cut the cost of doing business in New York State, and one of the biggest costs in New York State compared to other states is the taxes.
Do you believe that government should go back to a constitutional form?
Well, you're talking about federally, the state I don't know if the state constitution seems to mean as much. And as I'm an attorney and I see what goes on. And I don't see a whole lot of that constitutional issues in the state coming up. But federally, I think the federal government has completely lost its moorings. I think it lost its moorings, 80 years ago or more.
Yeah.
People are upset about the healthcare reform and they're saying it's unconstitutional. It's like, well, here's a whole lot of stuff that came before that was probably unconstitutional. I mean, if you're saying it's not fair to make people chip into health insurance, why is it okay to make them chip into Social Security? Why is it all of a sudden it's a constitutional issue for people when presumably it was a constitutional issue before?
Right.
So, I think the bigger issue is just the federal government has too much power.